Picture yourself at 45. You're at your desk on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing dramatic is happening. You're doing your job. But sometime in the last few years, something shifted. The Sunday dread that used to fade by Monday morning, it doesn't fully fade anymore. The commute that was once just a commute has started to feel like time you can feel leaving. You catch yourself doing a different kind of math now. Not the monthly budget math, but the longer math. How many more years of this? When does this become optional? And then you think, well, 67. That's the number, right? That's when Social Security kicks in at full benefit. That's the finish line the government drew. That's the plan. Except, and this is the part that quietly bothers you if you let yourself sit with it, 67 is 22 years away. You'll be doing this specific version of your life for another 22 years before you're allowed to stop. You'll be 67 years old before the system considers you eligible to retire. And by then, you do a small, quick, unpleasant calculation and close the thought. Here's what nobody tells you clearly. 67 is not a retirement plan. It's a government policy. It was designed for a specific purpose that has nothing to do with when you, specifically, should stop trading your time for income. And the difference between treating 67 as the answer and building your own answer is financially one of the most consequential decisions you'll make, even if you're 28 and you've never thought about any of this before, especially then. My name is Peter, and if you've ever looked at the standard retirement timeline, 40 years of working, Social Security at 67, maybe a modest pension if you're lucky, and felt like something about that math doesn't serve you, subscribe before we go further, because what I'm about to walk through is why that system is structured the way it is, why waiting until 67 is not the only option, even on a middle-class salary, and what the actual numbers look like when you build your own timeline instead of accepting the one that was handed to you. Let's start with the baseline, the financial picture of a normal middle-income earner who is doing everything the standard plan tells them to do. You make $63,000 a year. After federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security contributions, Medicare, you're taking home about $46,000. Call it $3,830 a month. That's your real number. Rent, $1,500. That's $18,000 a year. You're at $2,330. Car payment, $355. Insurance, $155. That's $510 for transportation. You're at $1,820. Student loans, $275. Utilities and phone, $175. Groceries, $325. That's $775 more. You're at $1,045. About $1,000 in true discretionary room, from which you also pay gas, anything social, anything irregular, anything unexpected, and into which you're also supposed to be putting retirement savings, which most financial plans suggest should be 10 to 15% of gross income. 10% of $63,000 is $6,300 a year. That's $525 a month from your $1,000 of breathing room. So you contribute $525 to your 401k. That leaves $520 a month for everything else your life requires. Now, let's say you do this consistently. You earn $63,000, you contribute $525 a month to retirement, you stay broadly at this income level with modest raises, you get an average 7% annual return on your retirement savings. Here's where you land at various points. At 45, if you started at 25, you have roughly $285,000 in your retirement account. At 55, you have around $650,000. At 65, you have about $1.4 million. At 67, you have close to $1.7 million. That sounds like a lot, and in some ways it is. But here's what $1.7 million actually produces as annual income under the standard 4% withdrawal rule, about $68,000 a year before tax, plus whatever Social Security provides,
which for an average earner is somewhere around $22,000 to $28,000 a year at full retirement age. So at 67, you'd have roughly $90,000 to $95,000 in annual income. That's more than you were making while working. You're fine. You did it. Except, here's the uncomfortable question underneath all of that. Was 67 the earliest this could have happened? Or is 67 just when the government said you could collect the benefit you spent 45 years paying into? Those are very different questions, and the answer changes everything about how you think about the next few decades.
Most people treat 67 as a financial target, as in, I need to get to 67 with enough saved to retire, and they build their entire financial plan around that endpoint. That's not a financial conclusion. That's a policy constraint masquerading as one. Here's some context worth understanding. Social Security full retirement age has been adjusted upward multiple times since the program was created in 1935. It started at 65. Life expectancy at the time was around 62, which meant the program was designed to pay benefits to a relatively small fraction of workers who lived past working age. As life expectancy increased, the benefit age was adjusted upward. It hit 67 for people born after 1960. The age isn't based on when people are ready to stop working or when stopping is financially sensible for the individual. It's based on when the government needs people to have worked long enough for the math of the overall program to function. It's a program management number, not your number. Now, that doesn't mean Social Security is bad or that you shouldn't factor it in. You paid into it, you'll receive it, it's real money. But treating the age at which you collect it as the target for your retirement planning is like planning your vacation around the airline's refund policy window rather than when you actually want to go. The policy exists for systemic reasons. Your retirement timeline should exist for your reasons. There's a principle in behavioral economics called status quo bias, the tendency to accept a default option not because it's objectively the best choice, but because it's the established one. It takes active cognitive effort to deviate from a default option, and in the absence of a compelling reason to build an alternative, most people don't. 67 is a retirement default. It's the number on the form. It's what your HR department references when it talks about benefits. It's what financial calculators use when you don't enter your own retirement age. And because it's everywhere, it starts to feel like the only reasonable answer. This is how status quo bias operates. It doesn't require you to consciously endorse 67, it just requires you to never seriously question it. And because questioning it feels vaguely presumptuous, like, who am I to retire before the official retirement age, most people don't. They accept the default and build their financial life around it. But here's what status quo bias costs in this specific context. Let's say you're 30 years old and you have two paths in front of you. Path 1, you follow the standard plan. You contribute 10% of income to retirement, you spend the rest, you reach 67 with roughly $1.7 million plus Social Security. You work for 37 more years. Path 2, you take a different approach. You contribute 20% of income to retirement, which, yes, requires living on less, and you continue doing so. At a 25% savings rate on $63,000, that's $12,600 a year, or about $10.50 a month, your retirement account hits $1.4 million not at 65, but around age 58 to 59. That's 8 to 9 years earlier, not because you made more money, because you directed more of what you made toward the asset that compounds. 8 or 9 years. That's the price of a 10 percentage point difference in savings rate, held consistently. The habit is the only difference. Let me put a concrete number on what retiring at 67 versus 58 actually means in terms of time. You're 28 right now. Working until 67 is 39 years of employment. Working until 58 is 30 years. That's 9 years of difference, roughly 3,285 days that you either spend employed or not, depending on which savings path you're on. Now, that doesn't mean 58 is right for everyone. Some people love their work and would choose to keep doing it. Some people have careers that don't permit a 20% savings rate on their current income. This isn't a one-size prescription, but here's what the math is actually telling you. Retirement isn't a fixed destination on a timeline that someone else drew. It's a threshold determined by the relationship between your accumulated assets, your annual expenses, and how much growth those assets can generate in perpetuity. When your assets can produce enough income to cover your expenses,
Through the 4% rule or whatever your chosen framework, you're financially independent, whether you're 50 or 58 or 67. The government's age is the threshold for Social Security benefits. Your threshold is different, and it's determined by your savings rate and the time you give those savings to compound. The person who accepts 67 as the default and never runs the numbers is, without meaning to, signing up for a timeline they didn't choose. And the alternative isn't extreme frugality or some radical lifestyle change. It's a savings rate that's meaningfully above what the standard plan suggests, maintained consistently, pointed to a target that you chose rather than one that was assigned.
Here's how people who retire early, and I'm not talking about extreme cases, I mean people who leave full-time employment in their late 50s or early 60s, here's how they think about this differently starting in their 30s. They don't think, when can I retire? They think, what savings rate gives me control over that timeline? That's a completely different question. The first one is passive. Retirement is something that happens to you at a predetermined time. The second one treats it as an outcome you're designing, and the design happens in your 30s, not your 60s. Concretely, here's what that mindset looks like in daily decisions. It's a Friday afternoon and a paycheck just hit your account. The default behavior, this money covers the month. You'll start saving more when you have more. The alternative behavior, 20% comes out before you touch the rest. Not because someone told you to, because you've done the math on what 20% versus 10% does to the end date, and the end date matters to you. You get a $4,000 raise. The default behavior, that's $333 more a month, things are a bit easier, life edges up slightly. The alternative, you keep living on what you were living on before the raise, and the entire $333, or as much of it as possible, goes to retirement savings. Your lifestyle doesn't change. Your timeline moves forward by roughly a year. You're 34, and you're deciding whether to stay in an expensive city or move somewhere cheaper. The default, I'll stay, this is where the opportunity is, maybe save a bit more later. The alternative, you run the numbers on what $400 less per month in rent does to your savings rate over 20 years. $400 a month at 7% over 20 years is about $208,000. That $400 isn't just $400. It's a year of retirement, maybe more. None of these decisions require extraordinary discipline. They require clarity about what you're trading. Once you know that your savings rate directly determines how many years of your life you spend employed, every spending decision has a different weight to it. Not guilt, clarity. The trade is explicit. You're not undisciplined for spending. You're making a choice about timeline. And some choices are worth it. Most people find that more of them aren't than they expected. I want to be specific about who this actually works for and who it doesn't, because I think honesty here is more useful than inspiration. If you're earning $40,000 a year and covering rent and basic expenses, a 20% savings rate may genuinely not be possible right now. The math doesn't permit it at every income level in every city. This isn't a failure, it's arithmetic. The path to earlier financial independence for someone at that income level runs through increasing income first, which opens up the savings rate. If you're earning $60,000 to $85,000 and you have reasonable housing costs and no catastrophic debt, a meaningful increase in savings rate from 10% to 15 or 20% is probably possible with some deliberate choices about spending. Not easy, not without trade-offs, but possible. And here's the honest thing about the trade-offs. The version of your life where you retire at 58 instead of 67 doesn't look dramatically different day to day in your 30s. You're not living in a van. You're not eating rice and beans for every meal. You're living on roughly what someone at your income level who isn't saving aggressively spends. It's just that the upper end of your discretionary spending is more deliberate. The lifestyle upgrades are slower. The car is kept a year or two longer than you'd otherwise want to. That's the cost. 9 years fewer of employment in exchange for keeping the car 2 years longer than you'd otherwise want to. That's the trade.
Stated plainly, it looks pretty different than it does when you've just accepted that 67 is the number and never looked at what the other cost actually is.
So here's the actual thing about the government's retirement age. It's not wrong that 67 is a useful benchmark. Social Security is real money, and collecting at full retirement age rather than early is usually worth it from a pure break-even standpoint. That's all worth understanding. But 67 was designed as a government management decision, not as a financial recommendation tailored to your life. It tells you when a government benefit kicks in. It says nothing about when you should stop exchanging your time for income. Those are completely different questions. The people who end up with meaningful choices about how they spend their late 50s and early 60s, not because they made a lot of money, but because they built something, they mostly share one thing. They started treating their savings rate as the primary variable they could control, and they made it larger than the default. Not extreme, just larger. And they held it there, without drama, for a long time. The system defaults to 67. You don't have to. Not because working is bad. Some people work until 75 because they love what they do, and that's a completely legitimate choice. But it should be a choice, not a constraint. Not something that happens to you because you never ran the numbers, or because 67 was on the form so you assumed that was the plan. The plan is yours to write. The number is yours to choose. And the math that backs up an earlier number, even 5 or 7 years earlier, is neither heroic nor extreme. It's just a savings rate, held consistently, pointed at a timeline that you actually want. That's it. That's the whole thing. You can wait until they tell you it's okay to stop, or you can decide when that is yourself. If you want to see exactly how freeing up your cash flow by eliminating your debt can accelerate this exact timeline, and why paying off the past is the only way to buy your future freedom, click the video on your screen right now. Stop waiting for 67 and start building your exit. I'll see you there.